She didn't describe the afterlife as fog and light. She described it like an architect, blueprints in hand, houses, and one fact she repeated again and again. Before you were born, you chose your own parents, your own pain, and even the moment of your own death. Today, what exactly she saw there, and why it changes everything you thought about the hardest chapter of your life. Sylvia Browne first saw her spirit guide at the age of 3, standing in her grandmother's kitchen. She called her Francine, a calm, warm woman in a flowing dress who, according to Sylvia, had lived a physical life many centuries earlier and had been guiding her between worlds ever since. From that day until her own death in 2013, Sylvia claimed she could enter that space at will, and she described it with such architectural specificity that even deeply skeptical journalists admitted her accounts gave them chills, not because it was frightening, but because it sounded too detailed to be simply a beautiful invention. Most people who talk about the afterlife use vague imagery. Light, peace, endless love, beautiful, but with nothing concrete to hold on to. Sylvia Browne did the exact opposite. She spoke of the other side as a real, dense, fully realized world, made of a different kind of matter, lighter and more responsive to thought, but no less concrete than the world you're reading these words in right now. She described the houses there as something each soul builds for itself, based on whatever made it happy here. A person who spent their whole life dreaming of a small house by the sea gets exactly that, except the roof never leaks and no heating bills ever arrive. A painter gets a studio with perfect light that never changes with the clouds. A gardener gets a garden where the flowers never wilt, yet smell even stronger than they do here. She insisted this wasn't a comforting metaphor for the grieving. She said she had personally seen these homes during her trance journeys, and she described the ceiling heights, the wall materials, the color of the sky, which, she said, turns a touch more violet there at sunset than it does here. But the most striking thing she described was entire cities, not scattered houses floating in emptiness, but real settlements organized around vocations. A city of scientists, a city of musicians, a place where souls who worked with animals during their lives continue doing exactly that, surrounded by the creatures they loved, because, in her words, animals have souls too, and they wait there for the people who loved them in life. And here's the detail people remember most often after her readings. She said that the animals you lose throughout your life, every single one, without exception, wait for you there alongside your relatives. Not as some vague presence, as the exact same recognizable creatures with the exact same habits. A woman from Nevada once described how Sylvia, knowing nothing about her loss, suddenly said, "There's a small dog sitting beside you with a dark patch on its left ear, and she really wants you to know she doesn't limp anymore." The woman had in fact owned exactly such a dog, one that had limped continuously after a paw injury as a puppy, and it had died 2 years before the session. No one but the woman herself knew about that limp, because the dog had long since stopped favoring that leg, and the owner had nearly forgotten about it entirely. She described libraries the size of entire city blocks, what she called the halls of wisdom, where what's stored isn't simply information, but literally every moment of every life ever lived, available for study to anyone who wants to finally understand a lesson they didn't manage to learn here. According to her, souls spend a significant amount of their time between incarnations there, not bored, but genuinely delighting in the process of learning, free from the exhaustion, rush and fear of failure that follow us in physical bodies. A real story that explains why her words resonated so deeply with people who had experienced loss. A woman from Oregon lost her daughter, 26 years old, cancer. A year later she came in for a reading, not looking for proof, but because she couldn't find peace. Sylvia, knowing nothing in advance about her daughter, described a specific place, a small house with a porch overlooking a field of horses, and said her daughter spent her time there caring for the horses because she had dreamed of them her whole life, but due to her illness, never even got the chance to ride one. The mother broke down crying right there in the office. Her daughter really had dreamed of horses since childhood, a dream she had never spoken about publicly, written down only in an old journal that no one but her mother had ever read. A second case Sylvia herself called one of the most compelling of her entire career. A man came to her not believing in any of it, more out of curiosity after his wife's persistent urging. He had lost his father, with whom he'd barely spoken in recent years because of an old family grudge. Sylvia described the father sitting in the library, yes, the one the size of a city block, flipping through a book about his own life, and in her words, rereading the chapter where his son was little, and they built model airplanes together. The man's expression changed instantly. He had never told anyone about this, not even his wife. It had been one of the last genuinely happy memories he had of his father, before the resentment tore their relationship apart. Now, the part worth staying for. What Sylvia Browne said about the moment before birth. Because this is where her descriptions stop being simply beautiful pictures and become something that forces you to reconsider your entire life. She claimed that before a soul returns to a physical body, it passes through what could be called a planning room. There, in the presence of other souls from its group, those it travels with across many incarnations, and recognizes instantly by a particular glow unique to each bond. The way you'd recognize a loved one's voice in a crowded room, it literally chooses its next life. Not at random, not by chance, consciously with full understanding of what's ahead. It chooses specific parents, sometimes the same ones, sometimes new, because those exact people, with all their flaws and all their love, will give it the experience needed for its next lesson. It chooses hardship in advance, illness, poverty, difficult relationships, not as punishment, but because it's precisely through these specific hardships that the soul intends to learn something that cannot be learned the easy way. And here's a detail that surprises people most the first time they hear it. Sylvia said, every soul builds not one death date into its plan, but several. She called them exit points. Moments throughout life when the soul had prearranged with itself the option to leave, if the lesson was already learned ahead of schedule, or if the path ahead turned out to be unbearably hard. Most people pass through these points without ever noticing, the accident narrowly avoided, the illness that suddenly went into remission, the moment when, in their own words, something pulled me back at the last second. She told of a woman who was scheduled to fly on a particular flight, but at the last moment inexplicably changed her mind, and that very plane later crashed. Sylvia explained this not as luck or coincidence, but as the moment that woman's soul approached one of its built-in exit points, and at the last second, from within, without words, decided for itself that it wanted to stay and continue. Sylvia described seeing, during one of her trance sessions, a specific soul preparing for incarnation who deliberately chose to be born to parents who would divorce when she was 7, because the experience of that early betrayal of trust was meant to become the very point of growth through which this soul would learn to build genuine closeness later in life, without repeating a pattern of avoidance. This is almost unbearable to hear the first time, because it means there are no random tragedies. There are only lessons we chose for ourselves in advance, in a state of complete wisdom, and then, upon entering a physical body, completely forgot we ever chose them. And here, what Sylvia called the most important thing she ever witnessed in decades of work. She said that every soul, just before descending into a new body, briefly sees the entire map of its coming life all at once. Not in detail, but as an overall pattern. All the hardships, all the joys, everyone it will meet, including the moment of its own death. And in that moment, she said, not a single soul turns away in fear. All of them, every single one she ever observed, without exception, look at that map with something close to gratitude, because what they see isn't misfortune, they see opportunity. What this means for you right now. If even part of what Sylvia Browne described is real, then the hardest chapter of your life, the one you still can't forgive yourself or someone else for, the pain that feels meaningless and far too heavy, was chosen. Not by accident, not as punishment, but as exactly the material your soul decided to build something from that couldn't have been built any other way. This doesn't mean the pain isn't real, it means it isn't empty. Write in the comments, if you could see the map of your own life before you were born, what lesson do you think you chose for yourself this time around? Has there been a moment in your life that, looking back now, feels like one of those very exit points when something inexplicably pulled you away from disaster? And is there a hardship in your life that maybe, after this video, is finally starting to look different?